The birds you love don't disappear from your feeder suddenly. They leave in stages, small withdrawals, slightly shorter visits. Then longer and longer gaps, until one morning you realize the goldfinches haven't been back in 2 weeks, and you can't pinpoint exactly when they stopped coming. By the time the absence is obvious, the decision was already made days ago. Something changed in the risk-reward calculation, and the birds you wanted most voted with their wings. The warning signs were there the whole time. You just didn't know what to look for. Backyard Bird Signals is going to give you the early warning system. Here are 5 birds whose arrival isn't just a presence, it is a message about what is coming next. Signal number 5, common grackle. This space has no consequences. The common grackle doesn't sneak up on you. It announces itself loudly, lands heavily, and immediately begins displacing whatever was there before. What it is actually signaling is that your feeder has registered as an undefended resource, a food site with no territorial holder capable of enforcing access limits. In avian community ecology, this matters more than it sounds. Research from the Cornell lab found that feeders with consistent populations of small territorial species show measurably lower rates of grackle dominance. The small birds aren't physically preventing the grackles. They are signaling that this space is occupied, which affects how the social network logs the location. When grackles move in and the dynamic tips toward their dominance, watch the chickadees first. They are the most sensitive early indicator. Chickadees that begin making faster, more erratic visits, grabbing a single seed, and retreating immediately rather than perching to eat, are showing you the stress response. 2 weeks later, they're coming less often. A month later, your feeder community has reorganized. The grackle's arrival is a clock starting. What you do in the first week determines what your feeder looks like in the first month. Signal number 4, European starling. The cavity nesters got your message and left. Here is the timeline that most people don't realize they're inside until it is over. Spring arrives. You put out fresh seed. A pair of starlings arrives, scouts the yard, and identifies the suet feeder and the nest box. They begin visiting daily. Within 2 to 3 weeks, they'll attempt to enter, fail, and move on to finding another site if the opening is standard. Opening 1.75 inches or more. Common on many commercially sold boxes, they will claim it. Meanwhile, the eastern bluebird pair that has been checking out your yard since late February. The pair you've watched make 3 cautious approaches to the box over 10 days. Stops. Coming. You don't necessarily see a confrontation. There may not be one. They assessed the situation, registered the starling activity around the box, and made a risk calculation. The box isn't worth a territorial fight against a larger, more aggressive species. When other options exist, except, increasingly, other options don't exist. Cornell Lab NestWatch data shows that in high-density suburban neighborhoods, the number of available natural cavity sites within the foraging range of a bluebird pair has declined dramatically over the past 50 years. As mature trees with woodpecker cavities are removed, the nest box you put up may have been the only viable site within their territory. The starlings took it. The bluebirds registered the signal and moved on. The starling at your feeder isn't just taking your suet. It is broadcasting an occupancy signal on the cavity real estate market that the birds you wanted to house can read perfectly. Signal number 3, Cooper's hawk. Something here is worth hunting regularly. The day a Cooper's hawk makes its first strike at your feeder is genuinely alarming. What it actually represents ecologically is the 3rd or 4th visit. The ones before it were reconnaissance. Mature Cooper's hawks, particularly individuals that have established suburban territories, show highly systematic hunting behavior. They survey potential hunting sites from elevated, concealed positions, often for 20 to 40 minutes before committing to a strike. They assess the flush distance of prey, how close they can approach before the birds scatter, the available escape cover. whether there are dense shrubs the prey can reach before the hawk can close the distance, and the post-flush return rate, how quickly the prey birds come back after a disturbance, indicating how habituated they are. GPS telemetry studies of suburban Cooper's hawks, published in Urban Ecosystems, found that individuals maintained active hunting routes that they revisited on 2 to 4 day cycles, long enough for prey habituation to rebuild between visits, short enough to catch individuals that have relaxed their vigilance. Your feeder, if it has been visited successfully once, is now on a route. The specific signal the Cooper's hawk sends to your other birds is immediate and precise. Resident songbirds maintain mental maps of predator hunting territories that overlap their foraging areas. After a successful hawk strike at a location, other birds show measurably increased vigilance. Shorter feeding bouts, more frequent scanning, faster retreat to cover for up to 72 hours. Individuals reduce their feeder visits permanently in favor of more sheltered feeding sites. The hawk isn't the reason your feeder goes quiet. It is the reason the birds are different, more careful, more alert, less settled than they were before. Signal number 2, brown-headed cowbird. The breeding season is already compromised. Most of the damage the cowbird does is invisible until the season is over. In late April and May, watch the birds for an unusual behavioral pattern. Song sparrows, yellow warblers, or common yellowthroats that are normally calm. They begin showing what ornithologists describe as cowbird alert behavior. Rapid head turning, short, interrupted feeding bouts, and occasional alarm calls. They aren't aimed at raptors, but at the cowbirds moving through the feeding area. They know what follows the surveillance phase, and they cannot prevent the parasitism. The evolutionary arms race has never produced a reliable behavioral defense. Research found that host species nesting near a feeder showed doubled parasitism rates. The feeder didn't cause the cowbird, but it extended their effective surveillance range. The cowbird at your May feeder is not just eating your seed. It is mapping the nesting birds that your feeder attracted, and the breeding season you've been watching since February is being redirected. Signal number 1, house sparrow. This address is taken. The house sparrow sends the clearest, most permanent signal on this list. It does so through the slow establishment of a fact. This yard is ours now. The mechanism is territorial saturation. House sparrows don't just compete for resources. They claim and defend geographic space year-round, which is unusual for a bird. A mated pair that establishes a territory in spring will defend it all winter. When spring returns, the native cavity nesters find a territory held for 9 months. Feeder watchers who tracked this transition describe a very specific, hollow feeling. They remember the exact season when they last saw a bluebird at their home. They look at the box, but they can't identify the exact cause. The house sparrows were already there. The bluebird came and went. It never nested. The sparrows had already sent the signal. This site is occupied. The defense is consistent. The cost of competing here exceeds the benefit before the bluebird made a decision. Research from the Cornell lab confirms this through NestWatch data. Yards with year-round house sparrow residency near nest boxes show a 35 to 40% reduction in successful bluebird nesting, compared to matched sites without sparrow residency. The birds you lost didn't leave because of a fight. They left because the house sparrow's occupancy signal was clear enough. That fighting wasn't rational. How to read the signals before it is too late. Every one of these 5 birds is sending a message. The message isn't "this yard is ruined." The message is "this yard has current conditions that favor me over the birds you want." Current conditions can be changed. Backyard bird signals comes back to the same practical principle. Across every issue of feeder ecology, habitat design outperforms feeder management alone. The structural choices: escape cover within 2 feet of feeders, entrance hole sizing on nest boxes, native plantings that create multi-layer habitat matter more than seed selection or feeder placement in isolation. They shift the underlying conditions that these 5 species are reading when they decide whether to settle in your yard permanently or move on. The feeder is the most visible element of your backyard bird habitat. But what it is actually measuring is the whole system around it. What you just learned isn't really about birds. It is about learning to read the early signals in any system before the thing you care about has already quietly left. Follow Backyard Bird Signals for weekly content on feeder ecology and habitat design. Which of these signals have you noticed in your own yard? Tell us in the comments.